Ellen Rosser wrote to the MCN discussion listserv, to Ezekiel Kralin, who I actually have a story written by Ezekiel Kralin to read to you a little bit later on in the show. And he's been very prolific writing to all the local news groups. He lives in San Francisco, but he's discovered the MCN announced listserv and the MCN discussion listserv. And I'm thinking there's something else that he sometimes writes to the Anderson Valley Advertiser. And he's an interesting character. He's got an interesting attitude and a way of communicating that pissed off Ellen Rosser no end. And so Ellen Rosser wrote, "Well, Zeke, I think it's time to answer your charges. I am not a homophobe. I have had lesbian or gay friends for much of my life. I admit that since I have gained knowledge of God and God's laws, my first 36 years were as an agnostic, but since I have gained knowledge of God and God's laws, I wish they and my heterosexual friends who have sex outside of marriage would gain insight into what creates a healthy and happy society in which children's health and happiness come first. Confucius said that one can judge a society by the care it takes of its children, but I try not to alienate my friends by these observations. However, I'm totally opposed to the LGBT movement, which has quite fraudulently made itself part of the civil rights movement. When I was the chair of the Affirmative Action Committee at my university, and we were organizing the agenda for affirmative action, I asked a leading Jewish faculty member if Jews should be included in affirmative action. She righteously replied, "No, Jews are not economically disadvantaged." Well, nor as a group are homosexuals. In fact, the gay movement is generally considered to have begun in 1970, when the Gay Caucus in the American Psychological Association lobbied the association to change the designation of homosexuality from a neurosis, as Freud had defined it, to normal. Those homosexual psychologists, who certainly were not economically disadvantaged, used their position of influence to change the definition. Then the American Medical Association followed suit. Doctors are not economically disadvantaged. And then the LGBT movement began to want laws written in their favor, since as a group they had not been discriminated against economically. Eventually they decided to attack religion by demanding that homosexuals be allowed to marry. Since 40% of the babies in the U.S. and Europe are born outside of marriage, obviously marriage is not of great consequence to probably over half of the citizens. Why did homosexuals focus on marriage, therefore? Because it was an attack on the religion that they, as evidenced by Zeke, dislike. And who was the chair of the LGBT Committee on Same-Sex Marriage? Who but billionaire Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, the corporation that was at least partly responsible for the 2008 recession in which 5 to 10 million people were foreclosed. Blankfein put failing subprime mortgages in the derivatives that he sold as AAA derivatives. Many pension funds suffered great losses, and the government of Iceland fell because of Blankfein's fraud. Goldman Sachs was fined billions for its fraud, but of course no one went to prison because of the very large campaign contributions to Obama. And I wonder if Obama's advocacy of same-sex marriage was influenced by Blankfein's campaign contributions. Well, Blankfein is a one-percenter who was used his economic power and influence to push the LGBT agenda on an originally unwilling public. As one who strongly objects to the corporate and billionaire control of U.S. politics, I also object to the LGBT similar influence over U.S. politics. I really don't think they should be able to sue a bakery for $135,000 because it didn't want to bake a cake for a gay marriage, any more than I think I should be able to sue a bakery because it doesn't want to bake a vegan birthday cake for me. I think the gay movement in this country is abusing its money, power, and influence to make neurosis seem health, AIDS, a disease as contagious as hepatitis B, seem a disability, and religion seem accusatory. Well, Pope Francis told Catholics to welcome homosexuals into their churches, and Christians generally have been told to hate the sin but love the sinner, even Zeke, I guess. And I replied to that to say, Ellen, you're just making Zeke's point for him. Queers are just as good as you are. They should have the same right to fall in love with whoever they fall in love with, and marry or not, and raise kids or not, as you do, and hold hands and kiss in a public place without being screamed at and or beaten to death like my college art teacher was. But in many places and much of the time, they don't have the same rights as you do, and they're in danger and persecuted and reviled and discriminated against and have limited recourse under the law. And that's due entirely to lawmakers pandering to religious sentiment. When they win half a right or even a quarter of a right, you hit the roof and declare that to be an attack on you. You're pissed off because psychologists, quote, changed the definition so queers were not considered insane? That goes so far beyond the business about the stupid cake, and it says so much about how little your tolerance and Christian loving kindness is really worth. I'm surprised Zeke wastes his time trying to explain anything to you. From the archives at zekeblog.wordpress.com, that's the Zeke blog by Ezekiel J. Kralin, Krahlin, an article from last year, from like about 9 months ago, 8 months ago. This is about last year's Republican National Convention. Ezekiel J. Kralin wrote, "The new GOP meme. As I continue to observe the LGBT news regarding threats coming from both Christians and Muslims, this curious message has started to bubble up in my brain pan several weeks earlier, and it crystallized the moment I heard a YouTube video of Newt Gingrich's speech at the Republican National Convention on July the 20th, 2016. Quote, Christians are using Muslim anti-queer jihad to make themselves look gay-friendlier than a hot bisexual 19-year-old Navy SEAL tweaking his buns off in downtown Montreal on an Arctic-chilled Christmas Eve, ready to do anything to keep warm tonight." End quote. I'm not really following the gist of the argument, but I'll continue reading it. "Forget for a moment the hilarious manner in which my glorious gay angels have conveyed such a revelation, and see for yourself what I mean. Click on the video link, then listen to what he says for the next 20 seconds. Newt Gingrich's speech at the 2016 RNC. That's a link to the article. And you can find it, actually, if you want to watch that and listen to it yourself. Zeke blog, Z-E-K-E blog, .wordpress.com. He continues, "I find Mr. Gingrich's declaration in that snippet of film so robust with import, at least from a gay man's perspective, but surely from an imam's perspective too, though for the opposite reason, as to be more than worthy to repeat below in plain text, that it become deeply ingrained in posterity. Quote, if our enemies had their way, not a single woman in this room could define her future. If our enemies had their way, gays, lesbians, and transgender citizens would be put to death as they are today in the Islamic State of Iran." That's Newt Gingrich speaking at the Republican National Convention in 2016. Gingrich's speech is a winning strategy to beat the Democrats this November. He's talking about the election in November of 2016. Just keep that in mind. But it is a trick, and a very clever one at that. For the GOP is obviously picking up issues that our party is either neglecting or on which they're dragging their feet. And no other topic is as timely and of such great import than LGBT rights. When has President Obama or any other progressive leader, such as Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton and a whole slew of others, directly addressed the rainbow-striped elephant in the living room that threatens to divide our nation along the bloodiest line, homophobia? The Orlando massacre was their golden opportunity to do just that. But instead, Obama focused on guns and not being Islamophobic, even when he knows that the perpetrator was raised by a fanatic Muslim who supports the Taliban and who spoke vehemently to his son about the evils of homosexuality throughout his entire short life. In fact, I believe that Obama has betrayed our community by downplaying homophobia, along with never confronting anti-gay bigotry in any of his speeches, including his State of the Union addresses, especially in light of this tidal wave of anti-queer bills flooding the red states and Republican lawmakers here and there vociferating death to gays. So now Newt Gingrich steps up to the podium and gives one of the most breathtaking, albeit brief, declarations in solid support of sexual minorities than any politician that came before. But I know it's a deceptive play in this game of party rivalry, and Donald Trump's selection of a rabidly homophobic vice president confirms my suspicion as clearly as the sun is bright. The new Republican meme, therefore, is we are the strongest allies of LGBT rights than any other party in history, end quote. And they can get away with it for two reasons. One, the Democrats have never addressed anti-gay bigotry, even when that is precisely what is so sorely needed these days. And two, Islamic homophobia is far worse than that of the Christian brand, and that's saying a lot, since Christians are directly responsible for inciting hatred, discrimination, and violence against LGBTs with especial vigor in recent years. They are hiding behind the skirts of Islam in order to appear like cuddly puppy dogs to LGBTs. But I am hoping that Newt's inspiring, though devious, speech will force the Democrats to catch up and even surpass the GOP's newfound rally round the gays scheme, just as Sanders' own progressive platform has motivated Hillary to swing more to the left than she would otherwise. But if this does not occur, look forward to an overwhelming rush to the grand old party by formerly dyed-in-the-wool Democrat sexual minorities. I'm sure the log cabin Republicans will cream in their dockers over this, for unless she makes a sea change, and I hope she will, Hillary will do little to advance our struggle with equality, except for a baby step here, a baby step there. Even now, when we're under phenomenal attack by both Christianity and Islam, there are some of us who believe at this point that a win for Trump will give us better odds than a win for Hillary. The reasoning is thus, should the Donald gain the highest office, he will be a lame duck throughout his entire term, in which case LGBTs can generate a greater force for change in our favor than Hillary's pro-disaster capitalism and war-hawk neoliberalism ever can. And this will obviously be true for all other progressive causes. The Republicans may even cater to our every whim in order to upstage their adversary in hopes of making further inroads into their political claims. Maybe even morph into a party more liberal than Bernie Sanders, as they inadvertently fall into a bottomless well of progressive waters in their blind scramble for power by seducing left-wing sirens. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. No doubt about it, we're stuck between Iraq and a hard place, for it looks like either vote is a roll of the devil's dice. The devil's dice. A euphemism for something, I'm sure.